Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. I'm your host, Logan Albright. And before we get too far out from my favorite season of the year, the Halloween season, I know it's November now, and it's getting a little bit late to be doing videos like this, but what can I say? I cling to the past, and I love Halloween and autumn and October so much that I just can't quite let it go yet. So I have one more book I want to talk about, kind of in the broader Halloween context, because I just finished it yesterday, and I think it's worth mentioning. It's a book that's written by a friend of mine named Luke Eastwood. He's a man from Ireland who I know and has been published on the same publisher that my book has come out with, although this book is from a different publisher. And he wrote this book a couple years ago, but it is only recently available in the United States where I live. And it's called Samhain, The Roots of Halloween. And it's a nice little concise primer on where the tradition of Halloween comes from and tying it back to this kind of ancient Celtic festival named Samhain. It's spelled Samhain, as you can see, but it's not pronounced Samhain, it's pronounced Samhain, and that's because the Irish language, like many Celtic languages, is weird and has different rules of pronunciation than we do in English. Anyway, I just read this, Roots of Halloween, and I thought it was really good, and I wanted to just give a little shout out to it for people who are like me, who are interested in Halloween and interested in the Celtic world. I'm kind of obsessed with the Celtic world. I'm learning with the Welsh language. I've done a little bit of study in some of the Irish and Scottish languages as well. And it's a part of the world that I think is really interesting. And I also am a pagan. I identify as a pagan, and I do a lot of pagan rituals and belong to a pagan group, and we do a lot of stuff, and we celebrate these different festivals that come from the ancient pagan calendar, and one of them is Samhain. And so this is something that I personally have a lot of interest in and have for a long time, and I like to read books like this. This is primarily a history book, I would say. Like a lot of these type of books are written for a general audience, and they're kind of souped up with a lot of, I don't know, kind of exaggeration or color that it's not necessarily true to life, and they try to be a little bit more sensational. This book is more a little bit more academic. It's primarily history. It's about the worldview of the Celtic world as respecting kind of the world of spirits, the other world. It's about ancient important religious sites in Ireland and other places where festivals would have taken place, and it's primarily concerned with the real historical truth. And this is important because when you especially talking about kind of neo-paganism and the way people celebrate these things now, there's a lot of mythology that has cropped up about how ancient these traditions are, where they come from, whether they've been an unbroken line of oral tradition, and a lot of that is made up. And you have to be careful when you're reading about this stuff to try to sort the truth from the fiction, because there's this mythology that has cropped up around neo-paganism where people like to represent their religion as older or more complicated or more sacred than it really was, or more unified than it really was. Like most neo-pagan traditions come from a wide variety of disparate sources and don't just come from a single unbroken line throughout thousands and thousands of years. A lot of these holidays, there's 8 pagan festivals scattered throughout the year, and a lot of them are really only formalized and named even in like the 1960s, 1970s. So, you got to be careful with how ancient some of them are. But I think that Luke Eastwood, the author, does a really good job of sorting that out and trying to stay true to what we actually know, which is not that much, because he's a Druid, and the Druid traditions, they date back to medieval Ireland, ancient Ireland, pre-medieval Ireland, actually, were not written down. The Druids did not have a written language. They didn't write anything down. The only accounts we have of them come from like invaders like the Romans and other people who kind of observed them from the outside and wrote about them. So we really don't know very much about their traditions. And so a lot of this is oral tradition, folklore, and things that archaeologists and anthropologists have been able to dig up over the years. And so that's important if you're interested in historical accuracy. And then in the latter half of the book, he kind of drifts a little bit from the raw history into a more folkloric approach to discussing this holiday, where he gathers kind of firsthand accounts of people's traditions from a lot of older people. A lot of other folklorists have gathered accounts of what the traditions were in different parts of the world and what people did and celebrated and the beliefs behind them. The last night of October, the first day of November, was considered the new year of the Celtic year, of the ancient pagan year. And it was the dividing point between, when winter starts, essentially. And when winter was a time of transition, when you've harvested your grains for the year, you've harvested your crops for the year, and now everything's going to start shutting down and dying, and it's going to get cold and it's going to get dark. And your job as an ancient person is to survive until spring. And there's a lot of thought about death, and there's a lot of thought about ancestors, and there's a lot of thought about, that kind of little bit of fear that goes along with entering this dark part of the year. And a lot of these traditions come from an association with recognizing the dead, honoring the dead, talking about to your ancestors, and then this idea of the spirit world, which is separate from the physical world, and this idea that this veil between these two worlds becomes thin at this time of New Year. And that's where a lot of these traditions come from. The masking up, the lighting lanterns, lighting candles, a lot of that stuff comes from these type of traditions. And so you get a lot of information about that sort of stuff in this book, which I think is really interesting. I personally like the folklore stuff best. I think the first-hand accounts of, seeing fairies or hearing banshees and stuff like that, I love that kind of stuff. But that's not primarily what this book is. Primarily, it's more of a history book. It was published with Irish Historical Press to, be a real reliable guide. Now, I struggle a little bit to evaluate books like this because I'm someone who has read a lot on this area. And I did learn a lot in this book. I learned a lot of things I didn't know. But I've been interested in Halloween, and I've been interested in paganism, and I've been interested in the supernatural, and I've been interested in folklore for decades, and since I was a child. And I've been reading a lot about it, and I've got like well over 200 books in my library about this kind of stuff that I've read. So it's hard for me to know like how good a book is and separate out my existing body of knowledge from that. And I would say that this book is better suited to a general audience of people who are interested in Halloween, who are interested in Celtic history, who are interested in Ireland, who are interested in these pagan festivals, but who don't know that much about it already. If you're someone who has been steeped in these traditions for many decades, you may not learn all that much from this book because a lot of this stuff is fairly well known. But I did learn some things from it. There's a lot in there that I didn't already know, so that's good. But I think that the primary audience for this book is people who are interested in this subject but who don't already know a ton about it. And it's not an especially deep dive, but it's a good survey of all the things that make Halloween what it is and where it comes from. And I think that's really cool. And he also touches on other traditions throughout the Celtic world. He talks about Brittany and the Breton language and the Breton customs. He talks about Wales, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, Scotland, all these other kind of Celtic places where these traditions have sort of become amalgamated from and turned into one thing that's now called Halloween. And Halloween is funny because it's sort of an American holiday. It's originally comes from Ireland, but it was Irish immigrants to America who created this holiday. And one of the things the author talks about is kind of the socio-political changes that brought about these traditions and what drove that wave of immigration and why the Irish custom spread to America more than to Britain. And now it's become such a big deal in America that it's kind of migrated back across the pond. And now the English and the Irish and the Scottish are doing Halloween the way that we Americans do it, with carving pumpkins instead of turnips. The original jack-o'-lanterns were turnips because pumpkins are not a native crop to Britain. They're a native crop to America. And now that's sort of moved back over and is becoming more popular over there, which I think is a pretty interesting kind of chain of events that led this holiday from ancient Ireland to America and then back over to Britain. But there's obviously a difference between the secular Halloween and the religious festival of Samhain, which is primarily about ancestor worship and entering the dark part of the year and being closely tied to the natural world. So I think that's an important distinction that a lot of people fail to make. And I'm guilty of this as well because I love Halloween so much that as a pagan celebrating Samhain, I incorporate Halloween traditions into that because they're at the same time of year and I like them both. So it's fun. I have another book I wanted to contrast with this one called The Old Magic of Christmas. And it's sort of a similar idea about the pagan roots of Christmas. But I wanted to draw a contrast between these two books because I think Luke's book does it right, and I think the Christmas book does it wrong in a lot of ways. The Christmas book, because there's not a huge amount of actual direct link between the pagan festival of Yule and the modern Christmas, there is some link, but it's not an enormous amount of material on that. The author kind of stretches the material and tries to incorporate basically every winter tradition from all over the world and call that the old magic of Christmas. And then there's also a lot of like arts and crafts stuff in the book where they're like, here's some things you can do at the Christmas time, some crafts you can make or some recipes you can cook. And it really felt kind of a little bit disingenuous and stretched and thin, where the author just collected all these kind of unrelated traditions, smashed them together, and said, this is what the roots of Christmas are. And it's not really that accurate. And then it's padded out with these activities, which I have no interest in doing. I appreciate that Luke Eastwood in this book has taken a drier, more academic approach, more serious approach, and has not tried to incorporate kind of every spooky tradition from all over the world and say, well, that's where Halloween comes from, when it's not true. There's one little mention of like vampires and werewolves, which are not especially connected to Samhain, but are connected to Halloween. But he makes that point. He says, vampires are a big part of Halloween celebrations now, but they have really nothing to do with Samhain. So I wanted to draw that distinction because I think that a lot of people who write these books do it in sort of an unserious way and don't really take the history, in a consistent, they don't treat the history in a consistent way where they're trying to be very accurate with it. And they just kind of lump all these different traditions together and say that's good enough. And I don't think that this book does that. And as a result, this book is maybe a little shorter than others. It's pretty concise, but I think it's got, given our paucity of information about this festival and how little we actually know about how it was celebrated in ancient times, I think it covers it quite well, especially for someone who's not that familiar with the material to begin with. So I just wanted to talk about this book because I just finished it and I liked it a lot. And we're just moving out of the Halloween season. And actually, like the ancient, we're not that sure because calendars get changed all the time, but the ancient celebration of Samhain tended to take place on November 5th or November 6th rather than October 31st. So I'm pretty close to when Samhain actually was in the publishing of this video. So, I wanted to talk about it before we get too far into November. I've got a lot of other stuff to talk about in November. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Luke Eastwood, who I think is an excellent author, and his books deserve attention. So if you're interested in these topics, I do recommend picking up Samhain, The Roots of Halloween, available now in the United States. It's been available in Britain and Ireland for, a couple of years, I think, maybe a year. But you should check it out, even though we're now past Halloween. If you're interested in these topics, it's well worth a read. You'll learn a lot. I learned a lot, and I appreciate that I got a chance to read it. So that's all I have to say for today, and I'll be back next week with another book review video. Maybe it won't be a book review video. Maybe it'll be a haul video. Maybe it'll be some kind of a collection video. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but you'll have to tune in and find out what it's going to be. It'll be a nice little surprise for you. And if you enjoy these sort of videos, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, and leave me comments down below because I always love to read your comments. That's all for me. I've been Logan Albright. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.